Morning, colleagues, delegates. We're just going to give 2 more minutes just for folks to join us. We had about 80 persons registering, both online and in person. So we'll allow 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you.
So good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure having you here in the room and our colleagues online. I think we will start the session now. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very good panel today with some very illustrious colleagues also on the different components of the panel. It's a pleasure having our partners, our friends, and like-minded people today here with us on this event. Uniting efforts for DRR and climate change action with the CADRI Partnership. We want to set course for the future, set course for where the partnership can go in the years ahead, but we would like to have, in a very open spirit, as we have done the consultations for the new phase, a conversation with many of you about what has CADRI achieved, what is the legacy, and where we are going. For those who are not familiar with the CADRI Partnership, the CADRI Partnership stands for CADRI, Capacity for Disaster Reduction Initiative, is a global platform of more than 20 organizations that are dedicated in achieving the sustainable development goals by delivering capacity to countries in the areas of disaster risk reduction and reduced climate risks. We provide countries with a mechanism to mobilize and pool not only expertise and resources, but a series of networks and knowledge that allows each country and within the UN system and others to be able to assess, look forward, what the country needs, what the country has, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, and how the collective can move forward better. It involves recurrently deployment of interagency teams that conduct capacity assessments in this topic. The initiative tries as much as possible to tailor its services to provide risk-informed development planning, but also humanitarian action across different sectors, and it adapts to the country's needs and realities. We have, in certain cases, add a module to the assessment on tourism, because tourism was very relevant to the country. In others, we would change that to food security. And so it's a tool that tries to respond to the realities and the needs that countries, communities, governments, and partners are facing. But as we reflect a bit on what we have done so far and where we want to go, it's also important to acknowledge the work that was done and the tremendous work, not only of the Secretariat, which I would like to convey my thanks for tirelessly dedication of the members of the Secretariat today and the ones in the past, but also to the hundreds of technical experts, partners, and government members that throughout these years have helped push forward CADRI in many countries. We will discuss today, and I will hand over after a short discussion on the achievements of the partnership to Ron to talk about the future. We have a new joint program for 24-2030, and we wanted to set course, and without learning, we never move. We keep doing the same things the same way. So we entered last year in a deep analysis and reflection process that has tried to dissect how can we be better, how can we better serve, how can we be more sustainable. But we will arrive to there. That work would have not been possible if over the past 5 years, the quantity and the quality of the work wouldn't speak for itself. Throughout 2023, CADRI focused in supporting 5 countries. It seems a small number, but it's a very large part, a very large portion of work. We have assisted the Democratic Republic of Congo, Costa Rica, Mongolia, Zambia, and Djibouti, and we have continued engagements from the previous year in the Maldives, Madagascar, and Cameroon. As you may understand, spreading the work and the capacity and the resources in such a geographic variety is quite significant and attests to the capacity of CADRI to mobilize local resources to try and find local solutions. This collective effort has significantly improved cooperation between the United Nations and national governments and has shown tangible progress on building the resilience within these countries at country level and on the country teams. I can highlight a few of those activities in terms of scoping and capacity diagnosis. Into 2023, we had 4 scoping missions, 3 capacity diagnoses between 2023 and January this year. The capacity diagnosis mission in Mongolia was preceded by an analytic map of disaster risk reduction and climate change action programs and initiatives. And this map identified 108 programs implemented by humanitarian and development partners, highlighting a significant number of existing and ongoing efforts at national and local levels. And this is another example of how CADRI looks deeply and broadly within the countries to flush the potential that is already in countries and the actions that are there. And CADRI can serve as the glue to unite like-minded people and the intentions we all have in many of these countries. The partnership has expanded its support of 2022 because there's a continuum of assistance and capacity development that needs to be maintained. It's not a one-time action. So support was provided in cooperation to Tanzania, Maldives, Ghana, Madagascar. The facilitation of workshops and reports was consolidated. There is a paper trail of how the partnership engages with countries, and there is a legacy in the form of the reports that are produced, high quality reports, but reports that help guide countries on their journey to resilience after the partnership has not dissolved, but phased out its first initial convening role. Of course, during 2023, we continue pulling this card and negotiating for the further year. There were discussions in 2023 about how the CADRI partnership and engagement could start working with the resident teams in Kenya and Mozambique, 2 very important countries. And we have seen in the news most recently, Kenya, the relevance for the urban floods that in other areas that Kenya is suffering. So it's very positive that we are in the cutting edge of needs, but in the cutting edge of utility to a country. And I think that is one of the most interesting parts of the CADRI partnership is it can be useful very pragmatically and very directly to a team that has to face the challenge that many countries like Kenya and Brazil are facing in today, not in tomorrow, but today. We continue to work with Cameroon and DRC on the capacity diagnosis. As I said, the dates are to be determined. This is another of the key points of CADRI is adapting to the time cycle of the countries. And so that is also one of the key reasons for the success and the ownership that countries derive from this process. But as we all know, in these 2 countries, the national activities and the political stability situation in this country sometimes impedes our plans, and we adapt to that. And so we have put this a bit on hold, sort of speaking, until there are conditions to do this, because the UN and the partners doing an exercise without the government is not a relevant exercise. So we need to adjust to the realities of these countries. The partnership has also continued investing in capacity and training. So 2 trainings were done. The first was held in March last year as a training of trainers, leaving a legacy of capacity with others. It had more than 30 participants from 12 partner agencies. And we did also a second training workshop in Bangkok in August last year that was organized by the UNDRR ROAP. And this session had more than 15 participants from 12 agencies. Again, the galvanizing capacity of the partnership is very significant. We have committed and have the commitment to outreach and work on advocacy throughout not only today, the events on the Humanitarian Network Partnerships Week, but also the World Vision International Forum in April 23 is we are a recurrent presence in some of these events. The tool itself had a positive progress with several performance improvements that have been made with more than 250 new registrations throughout the year. So people are absorbing the tool and trying to invest on the tool. I think that was from the previous year a very significant step of CADRI having an online tool that allows to decentralize and delocalize the capacity and the utility of what we are trying to do. And we also have finished the joint program for the next years. Ron will, as I said, talk and present that very soon. But we cannot only talk about successes without reflecting on the challenges. That would not be true to the essence of what CADRI tries to achieve. And so the CADRI Secretariat has experienced a significant staff turnover. We had a wonderful team dedicated for many years, but everything in life, change has its upsides and downsides. And so a significant staff turnover throughout the year made the partnership now at limited capacity. And living with that limited capacity, though being an enriching experience to us, trying to plan how to sort some of the commitments we have, is also something that needs to be noted. Even if we change a part of the approach of the partnership, there's always the need to have a secretariat that helps keep the cohesion. And that will apply to the conversation we'll have later about resources. It's not a large secretariat, it's a very small secretariat. And on a small secretariat, any person that is missing is actually a significant gap. We had challenges, as I said, with too many competing priorities. And so galvanizing the technical support in countries and in the region had its ups and downs. I think we were very successful, but that was due to a lot of work, insistence, and pressure to have this done. Working with partners so that we uplift their potential and uplift what they could contribute to the partnership. It's not an exercise that we come in and drop things on people. It's an exercise of a joint journey. And we want to continue to have that capacity for that joint journey. And that means time. And time sometimes is our enemy. And of course, because of the reduced capacity of the secretariat, the monitoring and evaluation, we recognize that we admit that have been a little bit more limited than our plans would like. We put extreme emphasis on monitoring and evaluation. It's a learning process to us and to who we work. But not having those resources constrains us to better understand our limitations. We have capacity to understand what we did good, what we did bad, what needs to improve, but we don't have the resources and the capacity to extend the learning a bit beyond that and go into depth in how the countries and the partners in the different missions have or not absorbed and what are the gaps there. So I think that's one of the things we need to build better for the future. And having said this short presentation on the CADRI achievements, I would lastly recall that we had the recent CADRI board member meeting. CADRI is clearly a significant value to country disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. The commitment of the partners to work on the partnership is there. The intention to work with us from the resident coordinators is there. The UNDCO wants to be more engaged with us. So we have the key partners and the key willingness on the table. We need to be able to galvanize the limited resources, and I will stress the limited resources needed to make this partnership take off. And I think that is what we have to discuss, and that we have, and we need your support to advance that. We have grown within certain limits. We have never become too big for our own good. We have never become too expensive for our own good. And 5 or 6 agencies with small yearly contributions have taken this partnership where it is today. What we are asking the world is help us continue this work and help us share a bit the burden of pulling this partnership and its processes forward in support of governments. I will hand over to Ronald, who will present to you the 2024-2030 CADRI joint program before we start the discussion and the conversation with you. I thank you all once more for being here. A pleasure. Ron, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuel. Such passion. Certainly, as I listened to you, I felt energized. Again, good morning, colleagues. Morning, colleagues online. If there are those who are joining us from other parts of the region and you are in the afternoon, good afternoon to you. My name is Ronald Jackson, Ron Jackson for short. I am the head of disaster risk reduction, recovery and resilience building at UNDP. And together with Emmanuel and the colleagues from IOM, I co-chair the CADRI Partnership. Allow me just to depart a little bit from the script, because as I listened to Manuel, I reflected a little bit. I think I'm one of a few people in the UN system that have been in a unique situation to be on the side of a beneficiary partner with the UN, and now to be engaged in leading the partnership on this issue. And I've said it, my colleagues in the UN system, they've heard me ad nauseum speak to the fact that this is what the countries want. This is what the government stakeholders and partners want. They want the UN to come together as one in matters where it serves us to come together. One, because of the efficiency, it's a lighter touch on the beneficiary states. It is allowing for us to absorb the contribution that the UN system has to offer to the government in a much more coordinated way, a much more effective way. And so having absorbed the journey, CADRI's journey from one lens as a beneficiary, having my own frustrations with the UN system, where I would have several UN actors coming to me offering similar interventions, and then trying to figure out how do we put it together. It's certainly pleasing for me to see that this partnership has survived decades, or a decade and a half at least. If I think back to when I first came upon the CADRI partnership. So just to attach my thoughts, my sense that where there's a will, there's a way, to the comments made by Manuel. And I think, let me again commend the CADRI partners for restating their commitment to the partnership. It's not very often you find the UN system coming together and staying together to work on a particular initiative. It must be applauded and it must be supported. I'm often interested to understand the mindset of even our donors and donor partners who ask for the UN to collaborate in this way. And when it is happening, then we really should see the kind of outpouring of support to sustain this type of process. So in terms of the new programmatic phase 2024 to 2030, there, I would say, 3 top line messages that I will share with you before I probably dive a little bit into the specific components of what's changed. So, one of the things we talked about was the need for us to really shift from a global driven process to one that became very central to the national level strategic processes and the national level partnership between the UN system and the governments, requiring therefore some institutionalization of the CADRI Partnership at country level, and also specific alignment with global frameworks, right? One of the things I think we need to do is to land these global frameworks more coherently at country level, achieving greater impact and also fostering end-to-end support. That's one. The second top line message is the need for us to be flexible in terms of engaging countries. In the past, we would say it was demand driven was what we would call it. Demand driven was the term we used. We would look for those countries who would certainly exhibit an interest. But now we're shifting a little bit, right? To ensuring that we can also do some supply driven approaches, aligning what, as Manuel said, the country processes such as the UN Sustainable Cooperation Framework, Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, but also looking at how we diversify the financing of the partnership. Small but beautiful. It doesn't require a lot of resources to be able to deliver it, but what it produces is of great impact. And the third message is the commitment to partnership that emerges. Partnership within the UN system, but also partnership with the government, partnership with resource mobilization partners, and of course, fostering a collective action towards building resilience and reducing disaster risk at the national level. Risk. One of the very important elements of the word risk is capacity. Right. So if one of the things we're really trying to do to address the level of risk that countries are facing in their development objectives, we have to elevate the capacity. And to do that, we have to understand where the capacity gaps are to be able to drive a comprehensive agenda for how we manage risk, whether it is multidimensional, whether we're talking about a multi-hazard context. That's what we need to be looking at. So 4 key areas where we sought to change the partnership. One, which is governance. The second is looking at country selection approach, the service offer, and the financing. And as Manuel said, we arrived at this through a very intense consultative process. Whilst the partnership is led by or co-chaired, I would say, by UNDP and IOM, we spent every moment ensuring that we had the consultation with the other members of the partnership, with stakeholders, and with DCO, UNDCO, which really has emerged as a very important partner as we seek to move towards institutionalization. So most of 2023 was about that. It was about consulting, was about engaging, was about building ownership, not just among the partnership, but further away from the partnership as we seek to institutionalize. And we learned those lessons through those consultations, and we're still learning. I mean, just this morning, I spoke to one of our partner colleagues, and they said to me, do you think the name is also impacting us, right? It's more of a strategic engagement and not simply just about an assessment. And perhaps we're at a stage where we've evolved to the point where we may need to rethink how we define the partnership. So it's something that certainly we heard. So we're still learning, still looking to see how we ensure that we are fit for purpose for the journey ahead. So on governance, one of the things we sought to do was to institutionalize the CADRI process at national level and to ensure that we have leadership at the level of the RCO and the UN country teams. We also sought to leverage the existing global and regional and national coordination frameworks to adjust CADRI's governance processes. One message I think that came from the membership is if we shift towards the national level, what then becomes of the board and the way we've been able to monitor and track? the answer was very clear. I mean, there were processes that were being advanced by UNDRR, and you'll hear from our UNDRR colleagues a little later on, aligned with monitoring the Sendai framework. I almost said Hugo. That's so far. I can go even further back than that. The Sendai framework, and of course the UNSLG Senior Leadership Group, which has a number of recommendations that are very much aligned with what the CADRI Partnership is doing. And so, these processes will take on the responsibility of ensuring that there is clear visibility and monitoring of what CADRI offers, because it is a companion to these global processes that we're all seeking to deliver by 2030. It's also the transition phase. So we're moving towards this institutionalization process, but we've built in, as part of the arrangements, a 1-year transition phase to allow us to be able to test the case, right? I mean, earlier you heard about the end-to-end support. And so as we transition, we're looking at how do we embed these capacities closer to the field. What will that require? So that transition phase, which started in April of this year, will provide us some lead time towards the institutional phase, which will take place in 2025. Under the country selection process, as I said before, we're shifting from a demand-driven process to supply-driven approaches, but also we've availed ourselves the ability to have a mixed method approach. And one of the examples I can cite here is from Costa Rica, which the resident coordinator initiated the engagement as part of his efforts to advance the DRR CCA agenda within the context of the UNSCDF. So one of the things I learned, I'm sure it's not consistent, but I'm inquisitive. So, in consulting our UN stakeholders at the regional platform in Latin America, I asked our colleagues, how do you develop a UNSCDF process? I mean, it's a strategic process. What informs it? What level of analysis you put into determining where the gaps are and that you're gonna be supporting? And they were quite open in saying that they didn't do a lot of sort of detailed analysis. Now, this may not be consistent across all cases, but here we have a very good product, as Manuel said, that brings to it some very good analytical work, that can become the input into the UNSCDF process. And so one of the things we've recognized is the value of the product itself that comes out of this in informing the strategic process ahead, but also then helps us to target our resources and interventions thereafter. So it's not just about an assessment. It's about how we then are able to target and to make the resources more effectively address some of the needs that are emerging from that process. There's a consultation process that is ongoing with UNDCO to enhance the alignment with the UNSCDF development process, including how we also look at some of the countries that we can target in the mixed approach. And of course, the flexibility that is emerging in terms of how we do our resource planning and allocation of partner support. Under the service offer, here we're looking at end-to-end support to participating countries for greater impact. And this came out of the conversation we had with DCO. They're saying, yes, I mean, it's important that we do the assessment, but can you also support end-to-end with the governments in this process? And something we certainly said, yes, there are a number of the partner institutions that can deliver this, but we see other ways of being able to do so. In terms of again, with the service offer, leveraging existing capacities and mobilizing resources to support UNCT and government programming, and of course, the alignment with the country's UNCDF process for implementing the capacity diagnostics and recommendations also came out of the consultative process and shifting and changing the definition of the service offer. In terms of financing, what are the changes there? We saw certainly intensifying efforts from our partners to leverage resources both within, but also in the conversations they're having with our donors. And we applaud colleagues such as IOM, FAO, who are themselves stepping up and really helping us in that process. We see sustained contributions to the pool fund from at least 3 of the partner members with the potential for 4. We do understand that resources are on the decline in some instances, maybe not necessarily in terms of the quantum that's available to the UN system, but because of the multiplicity, as you said before, the bandwidth of programs that are emerging, perhaps some of them which are, I would say, would benefit from this capacity assessment. This is the one thing that I think remains consistent across all of the different global initiatives that are emerging. But despite that, you know, we're seeing a commitment from the colleagues to continue to try to put resources into the pool fund. And of course, we expect for the institutionalization phase to primarily secure resources through diversified resource mobilization strategies, efforts, reducing dependence on direct contributions from the CADRI partners, recognizing the burden that it presents, but being able to resource mobilize the quantum of funds to deliver this. As I said, one of the things that struck me about the partnership is that it doesn't require a lot of money to deliver it. Small is beautiful, and it still produces these, you know, I would say, very beautiful outputs. So I will stop there, and then certainly there are other elements we can tease out as we go into the Q&A, Manuel. Forgive me. It's important. I think it should be continued because I think it advances effective disaster risk reduction at the country level. And I think it builds the trust, partnership, ownership of the government on the journey ahead. And I think it addresses one of the important pillars of managing risk, capacity. We build capacity, we reduce vulnerability and exposure. And I think we're on our way to being able to deal better with these threats when they come. So back to you, my able co-chair. Do we open up for questions?
Yes, I think we could open for questions. We are very interested, of course, listening the opinions of you online and present. We also have our other panelists for the enriching of the conversation, but I think we could take, if available, questions. We don't want to pressure anyone, but already pressuring would be very useful, a question or two. So I see one candidate in the room. Is there anyone on the line, which we usually forget people online? Our apologies, colleagues, but does anyone on the line wants to break the ice on this session and make a question? If not, we will go to the colleague in the room, if you'd allow me. No? No, the team online are a bit shy. So our colleague in the end of the room has a question, and if anyone has signaled to me, and I will pass you the word after.
Hi, thank you. I'm Barbara Rosen-Jacobson. I work for Mercy Corps and the Zurich Climate Resilience Alliance. I have 2 questions, if I may. One is, how do you engage with global initiatives, and I'm in particularly thinking about the Santiago network that is going to be kind of hosted by UNDRR, and which has a big mandate on capacity. To what extent is there kind of a link with what you are doing and what is going to be done by the Santiago network? And the second is, I think from what I've understood, you're engaging a lot with national governments, but to what extent can you engage with kind of subnational governments or local governments? And also when we think about end to end, where's the end of the end? How far can you go? Thank you.
You take the first one?
Absolutely, we can share them. We can comment on it. First one is easy. The second one is hard.
That's why I was saying, give me the first 3. Any other question here? There's a colleague on the end of the room. Yes, please.
Hi, Masayo Kondo. I'm a former CADRI member from OCHA. I'm not sure if OCHA is still the member. I would like to learn about that. And I also like to know how the pool funds functions. You said 3 or 4 donors already engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions. Okay, I think we can go for these 3 questions. 1A, 1B, and 2.
Yeah.
Over to you.
You want to do 1A?
No, well, I think the 1A is very easy. UNDRR is part of the partnership. IOM and FAO are two members of the partnership that are inside the technical advisory group of the Santiago network. It's usually the same suspects, right? So the reality is that. So I think there's a very good space to be part of that conversation. There's many agencies involved, and the agency leading Santiago has our total support, and IOM and FAO are already in there to help them with parts of the technical components. So I think that, and as we do the work forward and the elaboration, we just had the first advisory meeting here in Geneva, the secretariat will be hosted here, the new coordinator is being hired. So there is a lot of potential to further streamline the 2 points of work, but we are united by the hip. So it's a good birth for the Santiago and for CADRI growth to be doing this work together.
Yeah, just to also add to that, I mean, the Santiago network is about matching the demand with the capacities to deliver it. So in the end, it comes back to the operational institutions that are part of the UN system. But also, of course, I mean, one of the things we haven't mentioned is that there's also non-UN entities such as the GNDR, and I don't know, IFRC, if you consider yourself UN and IFRC. So the point I'm making is that there are a number of partners. And what is also interesting is before the network was born, the CADRI mechanism also was, looking at how it matches the emerging priorities to UN institutions. So depending on what comes out as the need, it then looks at which 1, 2, or 3 UN institutions are well positioned to work together to deliver that particular solution. So I think that is in line and consistent with the approach on the Santiago network. On working with subnational governments, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's entirely possible. It then becomes a matter of how the UNSCDF speaks to issues around local governance as one of the pillars of engagement within delivering on the UNSCDF, right? And I think we as partners recognizing that governance is one of the issues that impacts on delivering on the objectives of Sendai, the objectives of the Paris Agreement. We should be looking at ensuring that that is one of the areas that is referenced as an intervention point, which then opens a space for how we work with local government. Individually as institutions, I think we are, focusing on some of the local governance related issues, but then it presents a very compelling, opportunity, I would say, if we start to frame that within the UNSCDF itself, and then allows us to go there. On end-to-end support, it's always going to be about the resources, right? It always comes down to the resources in terms of what we're able to do. It's about the resources, and it's about what the partners want us to do and where they want our support. If it is on strengthening local and community-related interventions, then that's where we should go. As a UN system, we should be humble enough to position ourselves where the partners and here government and local government see the greatest need in making the sort of transformational change that is required. OCHA is still a member of the partnership. They've also expressed their commitment to the partnership, like all of us. We're all grappling with the current resourcing environment. So the pool fund is currently subscribed by a number of, I said 3 to 4 of the partners. To talk to you a little bit about how that works, I probably will hand over to maybe, I don't know, Manuel, if you are versed, I'd leave that to you or Patrick or anyone from the team who can get into the specific details around how the pool fund works. I must say I've leaned on my team to kind of manage that part of it.
Yes, hello. My name is Patrick Gremier. I'm the co-chair of the assurance group. of CADRI. Well, currently we have for the pool fund, it's a UN joint program. So we have established a mechanism by which the fund is managed by UNDP through a UN to UN agreement. We can have a fund transfer to the pool fund. So that's how it has worked for several years now. And it's a very simple mechanism. Then at the end of the day, the funds are co-managed because we decide jointly with the Secretariat how the disbursements are made. Bear in mind also that the agencies beyond the 80,000 that are currently set contribution that per year, that each agency is also financing, so to speak, the expert deployments, the travel, the DSA when we have a capacity assessment in a country, which can be a 10 days, 15 days engagement. So we have beyond this support of financial contribution, also additional support from agencies who are technical partners, meaning that they are sending staff to join the team in country. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. We have one question from line. Could you please, online, could you please also share information about the team and if any structural changes within the partnership secretariat? So one of the things we've been trying to do is to see where we can manage some of our costs, and to determine whether or not this new phase that we're in requires the same sort of heavy infrastructure or architecture globally to be able to deliver this. In the past, as Patrick said, the partners would cover costs associated with their deployment of their teams, with the deployment of at a regional level, because there's also some amount of regionalization. But the Secretariat has largely been the subject of the pool fund and of UNDP. With the current issues around resource shortfalls across the agencies, we've slimmed that down a little bit to about, we started with 3 people at the course of this year, I think. 1 full-time consultant, intern, and an IC. I think somewhere in that region, and we're hoping to keep it at that level. We're currently in negotiations with a number of other actors on a standby partner arrangement, talking with other institutions around seconding individuals to keep the Secretariat at that size. We're hoping as we move into the institutionalization phase, again, more and more we won't need a sort of heavy presence globally as we start to hook into the monitoring and assessment processes as aligned with the UNSLG and the Sendai framework. I hope that helps. That was from Tigran. Hope that helps. From Reka, from the Office of the Special Advisor on Solutions to Internal Displacement, you're interested to hear if there are risks related to displacement considered in this work, and how, if so, can there be synergies with the work that is being taken forward by OSA and steering group action agenda members, many of whom are also part of CADRI. So I have my views on how we treat this, but Manuel, given your own core institutional responsibility, you may want to take first crack at this.
Hi, Reka. Thank you for the question. Putting another hat on the chair of one of the groups of the agenda on prevention, I believe, and we have made a big effort for CADRI to look into this, right? The management of displacement, which is a humanitarian function, needs to be perceived broader than that, needs to be perceived with anticipation, preparing the social infrastructure to understand the risks, the different risks, including the risk of displacement, preparing the social infrastructure to be able to manage efficiently and from a humanitarian point of view, the most protective mechanisms for the individuals, but also work in advance to create the basis for solutions to exist. I usually give the example, no one does house, land, and property the day after a typhoon. It needs to be start being done much before. So CADRI has and will continue, if all things fall into place, to invest on that, right? Because the exercise done is to understand the risks, the capacities, and multiply the solutions and the responses. But it's not just responses for a humanitarian crisis, is a response to avert humanitarian crisis. And I think that is something, and was a big push from all of us, the cooperation with DCO and building up the essence of what comes of the assessments into the common country frameworks is shaping the future of the UN and partners cooperation with these countries. Because it's not trying to say, this is what you have to do now. It says, this is what you have to build from today for a better tomorrow. And I think that part is the most significant. And of course, displacement in the new phase of CADRI will be very significant. I am very biased to be saying this because this has been one of my life objectives on this. In the global conversations of climate and risk, this conversation about the AMA approach, avert, minimize, and address, that we bring into the loss and damage. Displacement is a loss and damage question, but it's immoral that our investments are humanitarian investments to give humanitarian assistance if we do not use our capacity and resources to avert displacement. No one should be displaced in the world. And I think CADRI, aiming at sustainable development goals, is targeting in many different ways the basis to create that safety socially, physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, economically, and also political to this space. So this is a long-term goal, and I think we have to do more together. Let's see what it is. But thank you, Reka, for raising this question.
Thanks, Reka. I mean, absolutely agreeing with Manuel that it does take this into consideration. It's a negative outcome. And if we're talking about risk reduction, then certainly the assessment really looks at the capabilities for reducing and managing risk, one of which is how we manage the temporary or longer term displacement issues at country level. So, colleagues, we have to end this section of the discussion and move to our next panel of speakers. And in that regard, let me invite Abhilash and Dunya. Yep, and that's our first two speakers. To maybe you want to join us. You want to join us here? Yeah. I think there's a camera facing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I will pose questions to our two panelists. Here's this change, right? Yeah. So for Abhilash, what is CADRI's contribution to the implementation of the Sendai framework, and what are the concrete opportunities you see emerging at country level in that regard?
Thanks, Ron. First of all, thanks to you and all the colleagues from CADRI Secretariat for bringing us all together. It was nice to hear Manuel in the opening, and indeed it was inspiring. Although I had a coffee before that, I managed to walk that side also. I didn't do it. I had a few bullets, but then you and Manuel already spoke to most of it, starting from CFs, SDCFs. So maybe I'll also deviate a bit from what I was thinking of initially to put forward. I mean, we all those who have been in this area of work since long have seen and known CADRI in various forms and formats, from its initiation to where it is now, and what what you have been or the board has been thinking of going forward. As a advisory member to CADRI, we have always been very inspired on the capacity and the force that it brings forward to countries, in particular in the delivery of whether it was the Hugo framework of action or now this and that framework of action. There are not many interagencies instruments as strong as CADRI is, and we have to first take that into factor. We know there are others, right? I don't want to name them, but there are others which may have established but didn't work out, and then they faded with time in itself. CADRI has, being there for 15 years in itself is something to be proud of doing what it's doing on the ground and with the country teams. For the Sendai framework, I mean, if we do not take into account the first 5 years, because now we are in a post-political declaration or the post-midterm review era, so there are considerable priorities that the post-political declaration has put forward. So for instance, if we just take into view that the next year's global platform would be the first stock take of the political declaration and what has been achieved, this would be one of those milestones that needs to be looked at very closely. And for us and for the larger community out there, CADRI is one of those interagency instruments that can help in that process of bringing things together from a capacity perspective. Having said that, there are definitely some challenges that needs to be addressed in the process. The colleague rightly mentioned about where is the end to the service provision. National DRR strategies in a lot of countries, I mean, if you look at the Target E report, it says that a lot of countries already have the national DRR strategies. But do these countries have that capacity to deliver those DRR strategies? That's where the bottleneck starts with countries. Well, definitely there is an issue with governance architecture, but there is also issues just in delivery of those ambitious target, the DRR strategies. And this is where the CADRI mechanism comes into play. This is where the DRR strategies and the instruments that are backing those DRR strategies needs to be looked at from a perspective of how can the UN together bring forward that know-how, the technical assistance, but also understanding of how this needs to be delivered. Otherwise, we'll soon be in a stage where when we start talking about the 2030, post-2030 instrument, we'll be in a situation where the discussion would be about, okay, there were all these DRR strategies, but what happened to it? Why they could not be delivered when we had an instrument, interagency instrument to support it or back it up in itself? Somebody mentioned, or I think it was you or Manuel who mentioned about the nomenclature, the naming of CADRI in itself, right? You and I have discussed this in the past around the differentiation between disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation and what it creates at country level, both from a UN system perspective and a government's perspective also. It is for this interagency instrument that also to look at it from that perspective. For instance, the national adaptation plans are coming up for reviews. They have started in some processes, but there are more coming into the next year into those. I mean, that's another avenue that we need to look at it together. And I'm putting all this forward from a perspective that as an advisory board member, our role is to bring some of those thoughts and processes into play. On a short term level, you mentioned the UNSLG recommendations. Indeed, they are again another UN instrument where all the agencies have come forward to put forward on the table what are some of the key priorities for the UN, but based on their operations and understanding of countries and what needs to be done. The CADRI as an instrument is invaluable to that instrument's delivery also on the ground. And it's not just about reporting to the UN plan of action, per se, but taking those SLG recommendations to where they need to go at the country level, whether through the RCOs, through the DCOs, but also at a regional level through the IBCs and the RCPs in itself, because they are also at a regional level a vehicle that looks into addressing some of the common issues in the region. Local level indeed is something critical, and this has been something which has been discussed and debated multiple times. Localizing Sendai framework, localizing SDGs, localizing the Paris Agreement. But that's where we get goes a bit outside of the current capacity, and not just the resourcing, but also, bringing, there is a complexity when we go at country level, federal government versus decentralized governments, and, how do we operate in that environment and bring these things together. I mean, I can give you an example where there have been requests around providing Iraq. Iraq has requested on providing guidance around or supporting in establishing anticipatory financing instruments in Iraq. And this is not something that like one agency can support that country which is in transition. But this is something maybe where the capacity of CADRI and the know-how of the interagency mechanism could actually come to the front. Maybe this is something that FAO and WFP are better at, but it's not just about guiding Iraq in that establishing of the anticipatory financing instrument, but looking at the capacity also of Iraq. Can it actually deliver this, even if there is a guidance provided? And how can these things be brought in more together? Jordan was a very interesting example where our colleagues in ROAS, in the Arab states, and the CADRI colleagues worked together in bringing forward the assessment, but also making it part of the national policy. This is how sustainability and retention happens at country level. And that requires not just spreading thin, but maybe focusing together in a few countries where we can actually move from zero to a point of deliver impact, where we can show the impact of how these things are being put in place. Maybe I'll end with some of the upcoming things where we could potentially have some leverage. The regional platforms, the Asia Pacific Ministerial platform this year, the Europe and Central Asia platform in Montenegro, the Arab states in Kuwait, the Africa platform are some of those vehicles that we need to, there's a lack of another word, exploit in a more strategic and tactical way. Mm-hmm. But not just the platform and the event itself, but what happens before that. For instance, the Africa Working Group is a key vehicle that put forward what needs to happen in the region by doing those consultations with countries in advance to the regional platform and putting forward, the journey in the next few years to come. For all of these regional platforms this year, including the global platform and what happens next, the political declaration would be the stone to look at. So, in conclusion, I think what we can reiterate is, while the business model is evolving, the transition is happening. We would strongly recommend that we go back to the political declaration and see, where do we bring those things together and how can we assist countries in making it happen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pandey. Now we have Dunya Tijanovic.
Yes.
Yeah, did I pronounce that?
Well done.
From FAU. My question to you, Dunya, is how can we refine our outreach strategies and positioning of the global partnership to ensure links with relevant agendas and sustain engagement and support for its mission and activities?
Thank you very much. So really pleasure to be here at this event. And just to reiterate, FAO has been a member of CADRI since 2012. And very honored to have supported this partnership throughout these years, and we will continue to do so. From the beginning, as was mentioned, the idea of having this multidisciplinary initiative and team with a light footprint coming together around the same objectives to help countries really was something that we have always found inspiring and of a huge added value to the current institutional environment that we see in our work every day. And so we strongly support the CADRI Partnership going forward and look forward to this transition phase and beyond. In responding to this question around positioning, and it would be really interesting sort of to hear also the views from others in the room on this. But what I thought could be useful is also to reflect a little bit we spoke a lot about the institutional setup, but also some of the external drivers of what we're seeing, and to remind ourselves a little bit that the context has perhaps changed somewhat since the time of the foundation of the CADRI. And what does that mean? Because what we are seeing happening makes something like CADRI ever more urgent, actually. At the same time, makes it tricky from a resourcing point of view, but this is a temporary situation, we hope. So what we are seeing also from the FAO's perspective, which is of course focusing on food insecurity, and as part of our DRR work, we measure impacts of disasters across agricultural sectors, and we see this steady rise in frequency and intensity of disasters. We see that translated into food insecurity impacts. We are always, every year now, since 6-7 years, at an all-time high in terms of acute hunger numbers, which are driven by a set of interrelated factors. And what has also been changing, very concerningly, is that we are seeing the drivers being more and more interconnected, the vulnerabilities becoming more entrenched across crisis settings, and crisis becoming more and more protracted. So I'm speaking a little bit here because we are at the HNPW from a humanitarian perspective, but I think it's very relevant to shed light on why something like this is really fundamental. In addition to that, we have, of course, climate change and the climate crisis, which is now fully recognized. And also, you will all know, at COP28, very prominently, we had coming out also the humanitarian aspect of the climate crisis, and the messaging and the positioning around the need to already start addressing all these impacts. The loss and damage conversation is just another confirmation of the fact that we are facing massive impacts that are beyond adaptation at this point, and that it is absolutely urgent for us as a system to try and minimize and help countries address those. So some of these conversations, I think, really provide some of the background to our thinking around how CADRI can best position itself going forward. And we believe some of the answers to these questions are also in relation to how well it can articulate its value added in relation to these conversations. So in terms of solutions, so this is something where really I would like to highlight a few aspects, because in our work as FAO, we are a dual mandate agency. We work a lot across the humanitarian and resilience domains and in reducing risks and managing disaster impacts. We can see very clearly from our perspective, and this is something that has been established and proven through impact evaluations, that solutions to protracted crisis, solutions to growing humanitarian needs cannot come from one side or the other. The only solutions have to be multi-sector and cutting across the humanitarian, development, peace and climate domains. And so partnerships that bring these different components together and can look at from a multi-risk perspective what countries need and how to respond to that is really, a fundamental component of the solutions going forward. So we can see that very clearly in our view, and the matter is growingly urgent because everybody's aware of that we are at record level humanitarian needs, also huge gaps in underfunding, reduced humanitarian finance. And so we are unable to keep pace with what is happening. The other big piece of the solution is, of course, to do with uniting and converging a bit the climate change adaptation and DRR agendas, and the colleague Abhilash mentioned this, of course. So this is one of the fundamental components of CADRI, but within the discussions that I was just mentioning around the climate crisis, around the loss and damage, these are some of the fundamental entry points for CADRI to further articulate how it brings together, how it helps this convergence, how it helps countries overcome these silos. From FAO's point of view, these silos is something we see very concretely impeding effective disaster risk reduction in agri-food systems. And so this is really another direction in which we hope CADRI will go, connecting itself to these processes. So if we have a loss and damage fund being set up, the first board meeting was last week, actually, I was there. and a number of colleagues, I'm sure, have been following the proceedings online. So we well understand that there is a lot to do in terms of helping countries quantify loss and damage, understand priorities, understand the capacities they have or don't have to address loss and damage. And so there is a lot of potential for CADRI to be relevant on this front. So this is in terms of further positioning CADRI and securing donor support. I'm sure other colleagues will also be speaking to this, but obviously we have a number of key global partnerships and initiatives with which CADRI does need to confront itself. And I'm sure there are ongoing discussions, and obviously the Secretariat needs to be supported and capacitated to hold those discussions. So Santiago Network, I'm glad that that came up because obviously that's hugely relevant, again, connected to loss and damage. We have a whole series of other initiatives, Early Warning for All, the COP Declaration on Climate Relief, Peace and Recovery that has a series of follow-up processes related to it, the Getting Ahead of Disasters Charter, the REAP partnership. There are a number of, it's a busy space, let's say. And so certainly from a donor perspective, articulating the CADRI value added in relation to the current trends that we're seeing across countries, the value add, particularly, not only, but particularly in these crisis settings where solutions are urgently being sought. So what does CADRI bring to that? And the ability of CADRI to also go beyond the capacity diagnosis, this has also been discussed, and move into this next phase of actually informing investment. So what does this excellent work around capacity building and capacity diagnosis set the basis for? Can we go beyond and also start guiding the countries and informing investment plans and programs around addressing some of the gaps in adaptation and in disaster risk reduction? I also really appreciate the issue of localization having brought up. We also, from our perspective, believe that this is a fundamental aspect. We do know from our own work in resilience building and DRR that investment at the community level tends to be the one that is most resilient to shocks, that carries through also additional shocks that impact communities. And we are placing local communities really at the center of our own programming and investments. So we would like to really discuss how CADRI can be evolved in that direction as well. So I think I'll stop there. I sort of gave a barrage of thoughts and ideas. And again, on the resource mobilization, just to sort of end, because this is something that we do all need to explore together. Obviously, there are several opportunities linked to all these processes that we have been mentioning that could be interesting for CADRI to explore. So apart from humanitarian finance, but also the banks who are looking increasingly at how they can be relevant and build resilience in crisis settings. This isn't always necessarily connected to the CCA and DRR agendas, but should be, has to be. And the climate finance, obviously, who are also trying to increase finance in the most disaster-prone areas and need to be helped to do so also through mechanisms such as CADRI, helping to define where the investments should be prioritized. So thank you so much. Those would be my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dunya. Colleagues, we can choose to take a few questions for these two speakers, or we can invite the last three speakers and then we put all the questions together. I think I will go with the latter just to be efficient with the management of time. So let's just again thank Abhilash and Dunya for their sterling contributions, quite a bit of insightful contributions there for us to kind of pick up from and move forward. Let me invite now, I think I might have to shift to a standing position and give the floor to the seats to my next panelists, and I'll use the microphone and invite them to share this table mic between them. Let me invite John Stone, Dr. Kutsia Huda, and Andrew Knight. So IFRC, WHO, and GNDR to the front of the stage. I will take.
We could pull a chair, actually. We can all sit there. Yeah, sure.
Like it can be linked, so.
Yeah, it's just.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant.
That should be.
Of course. You bring the solutions, indeed. So let me give it to you press there and speak, I suppose. So for first speaker. Let me start with John. Your question, John, is how can we build bridges with other existing mechanisms, partnerships, fostering synergies and collaboration to unite and streamline efforts and collective endeavors?
Thank you very much, Ron, and it's a pleasure to see you all today, and good morning and good afternoon to people. So from I work for the Federation of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and we're really proud to be part of CADRI. It's amazing to see initiatives that have continued for such a long time. I think collectively in this sector, we have a strong track record of starting things, bankrupting them because they haven't quite worked, and then reinventing them. And I'm sure what you guys have noticed, the same as me, is that it's the same people who turn up in the same meetings for the new initiative. So I'm always really thrilled to see something that is continuing. And I think we collectively need to continue to invest in things that exist. Because each time that we create something, we create these delivery paths, we create these delivery channels, we create the buy-in and the goodwill to do things, and we must continue them. So that's the sort of opening thing. In terms of bridges to other initiatives, which do pop up from time to time, I myself have been part of a few new things. We will need to work increasingly hard to connect to things. There are huge challenges globally, largely driven by climate change, driven by global insecurity. I note that there's a lot of focus from my fellow speakers around the UN and the UN system. I think we also need a bit of a reality check that generally in a multilateral space, nations, organizations, people are losing a little bit of faith in what we collectively can deliver through our ways of working and the institutions that we've had. And it's great to hear CADRI be very real about that. This initiative is really about delivery through governments. It's really about with and by governments rather than to or on them. And I think this is a very important distinction. But again, we need to work very hard. So, things coming up like the Santiago Network, wider initiatives like the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, declarations, the importance and prominence of COPs, the climate conference of parties, all of these things, we need to continue embedding this at the root of it. And I mean, you might ask, what's a tall, white, straight guy from the global north talking about disasters for? Well, I think the simple fact is that people that look like me and come from where I come from generally don't die in disasters, or at least we don't lose out a lot. So actually, I think that's a very important point here that connects all of this. What connects the kind of challenge with climate change, the challenge with disaster risk, is that underlying everything are some entrenched and structural vulnerabilities, mostly faced by people who are the opposite of me, who we really need to focus on and make sure that we deliver assistance for. And so maybe I'd like to frame my 3 points. It's always good to have 3 points around that and around how this underlying vulnerability is really connecting everything. So the first way that I like to think of this sometimes is really through meetings, officials, and interventions. And I hope that we can switch to think a little bit about interventions, officials, and then meetings. And so the first one, meetings. We all meet in the same spaces, in the same initiatives. So I think it's on us, and it's great to see the leadership of UNDP and ION to do this, to really bring things together. I see Ronald regularly, which is great, but it will be across early warnings for all. It'll be this, it'll be REAP, it'll be technical processes with UNDRR. We really need to bring this together. And it's great to see, for example, UNDRR very much pushing this comprehensive risk management approach, which unifies planning, unifies everything else. So that's meetings. Officials. I'm sure some of you, like me, might have been a government official at some point, managing disaster risk. Even for me, from a global north country, there wasn't that many of us having to manage all of these different frameworks. And so the fact that we might expect countries without quite as large governments or quite as large civil services to prioritize all of these meetings and all of these initiatives, we really need to do an awful lot of hard work in order to bring them together. And then the final thing is around interventions. I think that when we think about what is actually required on the ground to address these structural vulnerabilities, these factors, including kind of inequality, poverty, certain groups who are more vulnerable than others. When we really think in the intervention space, I think that we will no longer talk about what's DRR, what's climate change adaptation, what's resilience, what's humanitarian. All of that becomes sort of largely irrelevant when you focus on those who are most vulnerable. So that's my sort of challenge to us all with this, is continue focusing on the interventions. I think that CADRI is doing that in the right place and at the right level. Continue being aware that the officials really don't have a lot of space and time to do stuff. So we very much need to be efficient. We need to do the hard work for them to join it together. And then in these meetings, let's make sure that we unashamedly talk about all of these initiatives that we've brought up. Let's, when we speak to donors, talk about them all. Let's be honest with them. And rather than saying, fund this and don't fund that, let's present this collective investment opportunity to donors, because each part of this system is very important, and CADRI is a big part of that.
Thank you very much, John. As I listened to your earlier contributions, I remember St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Striva project, a young researcher. Let me now turn to Kudsea. How might the partnership strategically integrate with and augment the efforts of agencies focusing on DRR, thereby strengthening their initiatives and priorities to effectively address the multiple challenges of DRR and climate change adaptation? From the WHO, as an example, how can CADRI support the priorities of universal health, preparedness review, what you refer to as UHPR, and any other thoughts you have?
Thank you very much, Ronald, for these questions. I think that these questions are quite important and pertinent, and it's a little bit like, very sector specific when it comes to health. So first of all, I would like to thank my previous speakers and of course, you and Manuel, the co-chairs for CADRI, and then would like to highlight why as WHO we are here. This is very important, as disasters take a profound toll on people's health, consequence of which remains beyond way beyond the media headlines fades. So that's where the problem is. So when we say that last 5 years, 150,000 people were killed from natural disasters, particularly mostly in 2023 from earthquake and other disasters in Turkey, Syria, and Arab Republic, Morocco, and Afghanistan. At the same time, it is important to mention that how many people were killed from COVID-19 pandemic, maybe Ebola, and then other epidemic and outbreak. So, and then when I refer to epidemic and outbreak, they don't happen in a sort of like, how would I say, like, just like that in a country where there is no other thing. But they also happen in the backdrop of all that I have just mentioned. Natural disaster, one of the previous speaker mentioned about protracted crisis, and on top of everything, these biological hazards, they affect and impact the communities. And not only that, from the effect of compounding risk, it affects altogether the development and the development agenda of a country. That's where you mentioned that our collective responsibilities. This is the reason WHO is part of it. WHO is trying to build the bridges with CADRI Partnership and then the activities of CADRI with what we do in-house. A few things I would like to highlight. I mean, I actually, if I can show you my pages, I actually came prepared with few things, and I saw that my previous speakers, they already covered a lot of things. So I took notes that what was not covered. So why I say that again, like coming from a specialized agency like health, I think that few of the thing I would like to highlight here, you asked me about universal health and preparedness review. And then CADRI, when we look at CADRI, CADRI is also doing some sort of assessment. What's the comparative advantage of CADRI in that case? All the agencies, I think that we have our own assessment because we need to have our baseline information. So in WHO, health is central. Then we do the multi-sectoral assessment, how these multi-sectors, the linkages with health, how it is impacting and affecting each other. The comparative advantage of CADRI is that in this assessment, disaster risk reduction is central. Disaster risk is central, and then how the other sectors can contribute and build the bridges between disaster risk and other sectoral initiatives and activities. That's how I see that the CADRI is. And in WHO, that's the reason we thought that universal health and preparedness review, we can build that bridge. And that on that note, I can give a specific example of Tanzania when the CADRI assessment happened in Tanzania, and that report, CADRI assessment report, big time helped to lay down the assessment of universal health preparedness and review. And then also this negotiation and this advocacy throughout the CADRI assessment helped also to advance the universal health and preparedness review. Because both the assessments, these are multi-hazard approach. These are also looking at the leadership and governance, and these are also looking at the financing potentials and financing opportunities. I think this is important. So then coming back to CADRI again, that yes, it is like, as I said, that a lot of things have been said. It's important and multi-sectorality important. It is more important to see how at the end of each assessment that anchor or embark into something substantial in the countries. So this is where I would like to bring up the discussion about the risk-informed governance. Because risk-informed governance is not only one agency or one sector's initiative. It is whole of government. Whole of governance, whole of government, whole of society. This is where I see that could be an added advantage of CADRI initiative. Then the discussion we had, Ronald, in the morning, that when we say CADRI, we always refer to an assessment. But we believe in WHO that it's more than that. But why we always refer to the assessment? Because this is the CADRI assessment, one of the activity of CADRI partnership that became in the limelight, and it's very focused and strong. So maybe there's an opportunity to bring some more elements to it, so that making it prominent and showing the benefit of partnership and also the comparative advantage. That would help certainly to build the bridges with other agencies. So as I said, that risk-informed governance could be one of those initiatives that could further enhance and the potential scoping of CADRI. I also would like to highlight here one thing. You mentioned, Ronald, in the morning, and also as a manual, that CADRI looks into the gaps in the system, multi-sectorality in the countries. I think there could be a good opportunity to look at review and then look at how CADRI happened over the decades. I remember that the first global workshop of CADRI took place in Cairo. WHO hosted it. It was the first global workshop of CADRI. From the very beginning, we thought that this partnership got immense potential. So this is something from the specialized agency we would like to tap into. This brings us like some added benefit of getting closer to the multi-sectorality. I think that this could be a good time to look back and see that what lessons we have learned throughout these years, and then where we can further build it. You mentioned about changing the name. So changing the name is okay from the perception, but what are the evidences around it? It's not only changing the name, maybe changing how we work, because the reason I refer to the first global workshop of CADRI, because that time we have been communicating through emails and text and all these things. Now we are at the era of artificial intelligence. What do we need now? What changes we need to bring into our any initiative? We are here for CADRI, and then each of us, we are being part of a lot of other initiatives. This is the Humanitarian Partners Network. We are discussing the disaster risk reduction here. And then of course the partnership around it. This is a step forward. Just a few weeks back, we discussed disaster risk management in European Union Parliament. I think these are the step forward. This in terms of strategic and policy side, how we can leverage the technology advancement of the information superhighway technologies, thinking, research, and all these things, and then look back and see that where we need to bring the changes, I would say changes, and to adapt better. When we talk about the climate change adaptation, we also need to think that how each agencies and our partnership can also adapt to the need of the time. So this is that's all I have had to share with you, but I'm here to answer the questions. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kutsia. Let me now turn to Andrew Knight, who is representing GNDR. And Andrew, your question. And I think this goes to the heart of one of the earlier questions from the floor around local governance, right? Why is community and local level engagement essential in the CADRI engagements, and how can it be improved to help strengthen national efforts on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, with the new phase of CADRI focusing on creating ownership at country level? How do we ensure leadership at local level? Floor is yours.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you very much for inviting us here. Thank you to the co-chairs. Thank you to everyone in the room, and of course everyone online as well. Really, thank you for creating the space for civil society representation here in this conversation, this very important conversation. To answer the question, why is community and local level engagement essential? Quite simply because it works. These are the people who are on the ground, local communities, local civil society organizations. These are the people who are on the ground actually implementing the activities. They are at the front line. It's no, here we are in Humanitarians Network and Partnership Week. It's no secret now that the frontline responders of in humanitarian contexts are local people, local responders at the front line. They're also at the front line of disasters, disaster risk, and indeed climate change as well. So these are the people that we're talking about. Yet, people still feel excluded. Local organizations still feel excluded. We at GNDR, which by the way is the global network of global network of civil society organizations for disaster reduction. We're a network of 1,800 members across 130 countries, most of whom are based in the global south, and all of whom are focusing on disaster risk reduction. We conducted the largest global independent review of disaster risk that was conducted entirely at the local level. It's called Views from the Front Line. Many of you may have heard of it. The data is online. It's still being reproduced and used around the world in various different contexts. And one of the findings we found from there was 84% of local organizations feel that they're not included in parts of planning or indeed implementation or designing strategies when it comes to national and local government DRR strategies and implementation. So without that level of exclusion and without that level of buy-in as well, it's very difficult to actually make action happen. We often talk about the last mile of communication, the last mile of implementation. Without that, for all the activities and all the money that is spent and all the global partners that are engaged, without that local level engagement to that last person on the ground, then we're not actually making the progress and achieving the goals that we want to achieve. So it's very, very important that that local organizations, particularly civil society organizations, are included and engaged. So earlier we talked about mobilizing local resources for local solutions. So I just wanted to sort of nuance that point a little bit, because actually already local civil society organizations and local actors are already mobilizing their resources. They're at the front line. They know the importance of taking this kind of action. And so just to nuance that a little bit, I think what we really need to be doing is mobilizing international resources for local solutions. And I think that's key here. One of the main things that needs to happen here is there needs to be more investment at the local level, of course, more engagement of civil society organizations, more representation of civil society organizations in global spaces at local level ones. And we need to empower them in different ways, and including the finance is really, really important. It needs to not trickle down, it needs to be given to the local level. That's hugely important. So what can we do to move forward on this? Well, there's a lot of support that's available for national governments, but what we want to do is kind of move that support, extend it beyond local governments, actually empower local governments themselves to be able to in turn empower local communities. If we don't need to stop at national governments at all, we need to extend this beyond that level, so we can get down to the local level where the actual where the action takes place and the difference is made. I think it was great, John, you mentioned earlier about the comprehensive disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, the risk management that UNDRR is promoting. I think that's really important. We're really going for inclusivity there. All these kind of conversations need to take place with everybody on board. So yes, we need to generate the conditions to help local governments and support them at CADRI. And I should say also that GNDR has been, you know, a long-term supporter of CADRI, almost from the beginning, in fact. Now, one of the solutions, I mentioned VFL, Views from the Front Line. It was a huge program, went across 50 countries in over 700 communities. 120,000 people were surveyed, interviewed, and discussed. And part of that program was that after identifying the challenges at the local level, local actors and local civil society organizations would then also identify solutions. And then those solutions would be funded with seed funding from the program to start, so they can implement their own activity. They identify the problems, implement the solutions, identify the problems, identify the solutions, and implement the solutions. And that's been extended also to displaced communities. Here we are in the Humanitarian Network and Partnerships Week. It's been extended to displacement communities. And also thanks to USA, BHA, also we are doing a project that's being extended to fragile and conflict-affected settings as well, where we're operating in 11 countries across 176 communities. So this is hugely important. This, when you bring that money down and empower communities so they're able to identify their problems, identify their solutions, and implement those solutions, there's buy-in there. There's real buy-in, which means that more people are on board, and it's more likely, it's more likely to work. So if I could, I realize we're talking about time there. Yes, so probably the key message is there. Yes, please engage local communities, empower national governments to engage local communities. That's where the heart is, and also to make sure and to facilitate finance so it reaches the local level. I think that's hugely important as we try to work towards our common goals of the 2030 agenda. In terms of localization, we need to put our money where our mouth is and empower local communities. So thank you very much. Over to you, Koja.
Thank you very much, Andrew. This was not an attempt to to wrap you up at all, but just signaling to Manuel that he should get ready to just offer some closing remarks on behalf of the partnership. Mindful that we do have participants in the audience, just want to offer at least one question to the audience present and one online. So before we close, yes, I think I see the request there.
Thanks a lot. I was impressed to CADRI Partnership. I wasn't is better than a shelter cluster organization, is more mixed. I think so. I'm Juan Frederic, working since '92 in with a local NGO in Bosnia in Haiti, and Haiti were helping people from North Kivu. But anyway, my question. Did we address the right problem when we are talking about risk reduction? When we see all these, because we spend a lot of natural resources, we consume natural resources, and we produce garbage. And the consequence could be air pollution, for example, for the cancer, it could be flooding, climate change, and so on. But still, I don't see the focus on the at your level, not at my national level or local level. It's not possible, but at your level, to address this problem of consumption is too high for that. It's good to ask us to be more resilient for flooding, cyclone, and so on, but still, yeah. Sorry.
Sure. No other requests. I see no request online, so let's probably address this question, and then I'll invite Manuel to probably wrap up for us. I'm going to pass the floor to any of our last 5 speakers. I mean, I have thoughts, but it's you're part of the show, so I want you guys to. Abhilash is asking for the mic to probably respond to that.
No, I was going to pass it to you.
Okay.
No,
I can.
It's a very interesting question, and I think it's something that we all have to also reflect on, because if we look at when we say risk, how are we defining risk? Because Sendai framework has its, there is what's called the list of all variance, hazards, and risks that Sendai framework is talking about responding. It goes from technological risk to nuclear, biological, and so on and so forth, right? A very recent example is the plastic treaty at the international level. We could have thought a few years back that, this is not within the domain of, let's say, disaster risk reduction, the way we sometimes articulate disaster risk reduction. But now we have managed to, as the international, in the intergovernmental process, we have managed to bring in the relation between plastic and disasters in itself, how it could harm the environment, which in turn leads to a disaster. So it's happening. Whether your expectation on the speed of it is a different conversation in itself, because some of these are intergovernmental mechanics which still have to further go down and trickle down and see the change. Or if you look at the CBD or the biodiversity discussion in itself, right? Because you have the various ministries, different ministries involved in that. Disaster management largely still is somewhere which is led by civil protection, which is where they don't have the authority and command to direct biodiversity discussion. So that's another conversation that still needs to be looked into.
Thanks so much, Abhilash. John, you wanted to comment as well? I'll give you a quick minute.
Well, it was just quickly to say do go search for the Climate Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations, which quite a few people or organizations in the room are signed up to, with commitments and targets, and it's hosted by ICFA, and there's a new secretariat that started relatively recently. So I think this is the kind of space to kind of, as you say, like put our money where our mouths are, to commit to doing this and to drive the change that we all think probably agree that we need to see in terms of reducing our impact and also dealing with the climate crisis through it.
Thanks, John. Good to see you.
I think you alluded to, thank you for the question. You alluded to the health perspective of it. Just so you know that from WHO side, this is what we advocate with the government. We do the risk assessment for the health in every country's national, subnational, local level to capture all this risk and how these are impacting from the communicable and non-communicable disease point of view as well. So this is one way to address this from health side. Thank you.
Yeah, and lastly, that's where we need to go. We need to be humble to say, yes, we've started, and you've heard from the colleagues the different parts of it, but I think we need to really zeroing on root cause and drivers, which is fundamentally at the heart of what you're saying. How are we really understanding what are the root causes and drivers that are leading to these manifestations? We're saying it as a system, and I think we're shifting and trying to figure out how we operationalize that, not just globally, but most importantly at the local level. So with that, over to you, Manuel. And let me thank you as I pass the floor to Manuel. Thank you for those online and for those in the audience for really engaging in this way. Over to you, Manuel.
No, please, you guys stay. There's no need. We can be a bit informal. We're all colleagues. No. I will summarize. It's fine to be standing. I will summarize picking up on the last question, because I think that's a good angle for this. We have discussed today the multi-dimensions of risk. We have discussed today the partnerships that are needed to address those risks. And we are finally, as John said, we have started this conversation about social inequalities. And now the conversation is moving to an issue of climate justice. And these two fundamentals of social inequalities and climate injustice are driving risks up, which means we need more people to address this. We need a broader comprehension of these questions. The diversity of technical aspects is very big. And this partnership is at the forefront of that. Can be. Maybe it was not intentional, but it's very well positioned to be the glue that unites a very wide range of stakeholders that can be of service in a strategic and in a very practical way to different countries. Of course, it needs certain resources to drive it, but from everything that we discussed today, I think it's clear that it also lives through the passion and the investment of the colleagues in governments, in agencies, in civil society. I think we need to do better. And I think what Andrew said about civil society participation, that is the big challenge of the future, how the joint work in countries needs to be more encompassing. We hear a lot about, when we are talking about disaster risk reduction, is discussions about infrastructure on social work that exclude civil society and individuals. That participation, it's extremely important now and in the future for adaptation. If it does not reflect the needs of individuals and their own contributions, we will fail. So I think it's very timely that we bring again what this participation and involvement is to the table. And I would allude to our colleague from FAO and WHO on the importance of food security and the connectivity of all of these points. And on health, we have come out of COVID. It was one, more can happen. So this interconnectivity of crisis needs a different eye. And UNDRR has been contributing to this partnership because it continues to be pointing us on the right direction. A more resilient world is a world more interconnected, but a world where resources are better distributed and partnerships are scaled up. So I thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure to join you today. Thank you, Ron, for his outstanding chairmanship, to the Secretariat for all the work, and for everyone that was on the panel and shared with us. This is a work in progress. It's good, but it needs to be better. So thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good day.
Yes.